In at 9, Mr. Hippo. Okay, this is kind of a joke number, but also not, because Mr. Hippo is literally the worst thing ever in Ultimate Custom Night. Mr. Hippo is a viable animatronic from FNAF 6 that returns as an antagonist in Ultimate Custom Night. Okay, Mr. Hippo will climb through the duct systems trying to reach one of the 2 hoses in the office. Hoses? Is that right? I don't know. I just copied and pasted that line from the wiki. The player needs to use an audio lure to keep him in place and to move him around so that they can use the heater to push him back, and he is fooled 100% of the time by the audio lure. Also is fooled faster than Helpy Frog. However, most of the scare factor from this animatronic doesn't come from their behavior or their design. This time around, rather, their death lines. Cause you see, Mr. Hippo has a knack for going on about things. A lot. Okay, it's like me on a first date. Still, he will go into like 5-minute long speeches that you have to deal with every time he kills you. Meaning that if you get jump scared, you're boned for enough time to make a sandwich, okay? Which is annoying as hell. Getting killed by him enough will eventually and cause you to end up agreeing with me that he needs to be springlocked. Because you end up knowing what comes after the smoke of the jump scare clears, and it's just pain. In at 8, Roxy. Okay, I know that Roxy and Mr. Hippo are animatronics and incapable of actually feeling pain because of a spring locking, but honestly, I also just hate this kind of person. The self-centered tool bag who only cares about themselves, whether they secretly hate themselves or not, that's not what matters here, okay? Who you are and what kind of person you are is defined by how you treat others and who you are when the pressure is on. And Roxy is just horrible. And while they may not be able to feel pain from the spring locking, at least Roxy will be contained if they got spring locked, okay? And honestly, that's what I need. I don't want to deal with this personality type. I've dealt with enough people like this throughout my life, and I'm still only 22 goddamn years old, which means that I'm really fed up with this shit. So yeah, there's not much else to say with this one other than I want her to be restrained so that I don't have to deal with her. So yeah, that's it. That's the number. What are you still doing here? Go to the next one. And at 7, Lewis. Lewis was introduced in FNAF AR through emails that he's lucky he's the only one seeing, and not HR. Lewis is a creepy coworker of Ness who works at IT, at the company creating all the robots for the Fazbear Entertainment delivery service that we experience in Special Delivery. And he's probably the creepiest damn character in the entire series. Honestly, I'm surprised he hasn't been killed, especially if Ness is indeed Vanessa and Vanny, since he seems to be on to their little scheme. He's intercepted search queries and emails that just make Ness seem off, and straight up like a serial killer. Didn't she order like realistic human masks at some point? Anyway, if William had seen these emails addressed to Ness, he would feel required to take matters into his own hands and get rid of the guy who keeps spying on them. Unless this would be a similar situation to Henry, where the cops would look at these emails and see that he was harassing Ness and then maybe take her in for questioning. I mean, it's a realistic scenario. Ness feels threatened or annoyed by Lewis and then just gets rid of him. People have killed for less. And the contents of those emails is only more incriminating. Like, who orders realistic human faces? Aside from me. And at 6, Indie Game Dev. The Scott Cawthon in-universe stand-in is an interesting character I hope they explore more in the future. But with Scott retiring, could this character meet a grisly fate? It could be that Fazbear Entertainment wants to tie up loose ends while trying to rebuild their reputation, or that maybe they threatened him into making the games in the first place, so they're keeping a close watch on him. I mean, if William learns about what this guy was making, maybe he would feel like he needs to silence the one man who knows too much, or strong-arm him into creating the games after he learned that he knew about the real story behind Fazbear Entertainment. It's entirely possible. It could also be that the indie game dev was the person the FNAF 6 franchise owner job was for, since there was a way out plan for them, and Henry knew at least one other person that knew what was going on. But that person wasn't Michael, as we learned from the final speech, meaning that whoever that was almost a victim as well.
And to you, my brave volunteer, who somehow found this job listing not intended for you.
Halfway through in at number 5, William Afton. William does eventually kick the bucket, but even when his physical form dies, he comes back as sentient code in a video game, and isn't that the dream? Either way, this man narrowly avoids dying throughout the whole series. This man was possessed by a spirit that intentionally kept him alive through multiple instances that should have killed him, so I think if anything, this guy is the definition of almost victim. William doesn't even ultimately die until he allows himself to in the Fazbear warehouse in the Man in Room 1280, and even when his body explodes, he's still surviving through latching onto a hard drive that gets scanned into Help Wanted. And I have no doubts that he picked the one that would specifically be used, or one that he instructed someone else to use when making the VR game. At least if the game was planned before his demise. Seriously though, William survived a spring locking, the FNAF 3 fire, the FNAF 6 fire, and the constant assassination attempts from the hospital staff. So this guy is for sure making it onto this list. And at 4, Kelsey. Kelsey, in essence, is the main antagonist to the Fazbear Frights story, the new kid from the third Fazbear Frights book, 1:35 AM. Kelsey had just moved to town and ends up making friends with the protagonist, Devin. Devin ends up getting jealous of how much everyone loves Kelsey, so he hatches a plan with his friend to trap him in a Springlock suit for a few hours. However, when they unleash their plan, the Springlock suit fails and kills Kelsey. At least, so they thought. Since a week later, Devin returns to make sure Kelsey is still there, only to find a different body in the suit. He knows it's someone else because the hair color's different. And then Devin gets stuck in the suit by his arm and bleeds out. Only for the story to cut back to Kelsey meeting 2 more kids at his new school. This is an interesting story, because while Kelsey did get Springlock, he ends up being fine. So what happened? Some think that Kelsey's a ghost, some think that he's the one you should not have killed, others don't know. But either way, this version of Kelsey, the one who got into the suit, was nearly a victim that somehow survived or escaped. At least, so we think. Getting close to the end, and at number 3, Gregory. The way I see it, Gregory is such a stuck-up little shit that he would absolutely deserve to be crushed by metal robotic bits being put in the same place as his bones. Because this kid is just a damn menace that seemingly doesn't want to take responsibility for any of his actions. And you know what? None of you hold him accountable either. Gregory orders the robots to disassemble Vanny. Quote. Okay, Gregory being willing to kill Vanny is already pretty messed up, but while some would argue self-defense, this is not self-defense. Self-defense requires a reasonable amount of force to be used, okay? Tearing a person limb from limb is not reasonable force. This kid is easily able to destroy all 3 animatronics without a moment's hesitation and then use their upgrades on Freddy. He is willing to kill Vanny, like I said, despite actually seemingly knowing her like we see in the best ending, and then he burns Burn Trap multiple times in an attempt to stop him from taking control over Freddy, but again, he's also just setting fire to this thing all the time. So like, what the absolute living hell is this kid doing? And how is he so nonchalant about this whole thing? Okay, this guy literally kills Vanny and then only gets emotional when he has to go talk to a destroyed Freddy robot that they can remake. Dude, Vanny's literally bleeding out right next to you. I'm sure that her ribs are just splayed across the floor. Dude, couldn't you have just said like stop Vanny or restrain Vanny? Stop Vanny would have been the easiest one, not freaking disassemble. Okay, you're not panicking about literally anything else in this game. Okay, just say something that doesn't involve a human dying, for God's sakes, okay? Stop Vanny! You're like, dude! And finally, in at number 1, Michael Afton. Michael Afton absolutely, in my mind, deserves to have gotten Springlocked instead of simply burning in FNAF 6, okay? Like, sure, he seems to be playing the good guy, going after his father, but in reality, Michael, to me, he's just playing the hero this whole time and not actually doing anything. He says he's trying to right his father's wrongs and whatnot, but even Oliver Queen did more than that, okay? He's not doing it because he's a good person, he's doing it because he feels bad and not because of, like, some higher moral code. He blames himself for getting his brother killed, which I mean is understandable, but then that subsequently means that anything he does to try and like fix the things that his father did is just to make himself feel better about his own mistakes. Because in the end, nothing is gonna bring his little bro back, okay? And he doesn't even really have the stomach to actually stop his father once and for all. He says that he's going to come find him, but then when he does in FNAF 6, he doesn't burn down the place to stop him, okay? Henry does that. Yeah, Henry is the only one who's actually willing to sack up and try to stop William, even if he does it in a cowardly way, okay? That just shows how not serious Michael is. And if he really wanted to make sure that William was dead, he wouldn't have let himself burn in the FNAF 6 fire, okay? But he does. He lets himself burn, or at least doesn't actually successfully get out of the building so that he won't have to feel the regret of hurting his brother anymore, okay? Because he has the curse of knowledge, since he knows what his father was doing, and he doesn't want to deal with it anymore. And you know what? That deserves a spring locking. That's right. I don't care how mad at you are at me in the comments, okay? I don't care. It's true, alright? It's Monday morning, I'm mad. And at 10, William Afton. Again, could William have suffered a Springlock failure before getting trapped in the spring bodysuit like we see in FNAF 3? It's possible, and it certainly appears like that's the case in the FNAF novels, since William is described to have scars that are consistent with the Springlock failure before becoming Springtrap in the novels. So could it have happened in the games? Could William have been the reason the Springlock suits were retired? Since we hear of an unfortunate incident at the sister location, so is that unfortunate incident William? There are plenty of people it could be, but William having to deal with it would certainly get them put out of commission for a time. But with William continuing to use the suit and putting it on when the room was wet like we see in FNAF 3's cutscene, it suggests that that's probably unlikely, but it's still possible. So since this list is possible Springlock victims, I think he deserves to be on this list, at least at number 10, since can we really talk about Springlock victims without mentioning good old Willie Afton? Exactly. And at 8, Phone Guy. Phone Guy's death is one of the most mysterious deaths of all. We hear him die in FNAF 1 on night 4 with the sound of multiple animatronics banging on his doors, but we never really get an explanation as to what happens to him. We know he dies, but other than that it's all speculation. One of the theories though is that animatronics got him and shoved him into a suit, resulting in a very painful death, especially since at this point the Springlock suits were either still in operation or hadn't been totally removed. The actual timeline of the events of the Springlock suits is a little messy since we don't really have years for things like them getting scrapped, yet it's still possible that Phone Guy was shoved into one or maybe used it to hide. After all, maybe Phone Guy is secretly William Afton and Scott just didn't want us to know that yet or something. I still feel like that might have been in the realm of possibility. Maybe not now, but it was. And at 6, FNAF cops. The cops in the FNAF universe are absolutely the most moronic bunch of people I have ever, I guess, not seen but heard of, honestly. Like, yeah, I get that they couldn't catch William for story purposes, but that seemingly was retconned, since in the first game they said that they had made an arrest. They could have ended it right there. The story could have been over, but they couldn't find the bodies, so they let him go. Yeah, ignore the animatronics that smell like death, are leaking blood and other bodily fluids, and that many parents have compared to reanimated corpses. Those don't have anything to do with this scenario. Yeah, totally. And even when they find baby's blueprints and see that she has a child storage tank, they don't do anything more than question him. Quote, "There's no doubting what you've achieved on a technical level. These are clearly state of the art. There are just certain design choices that were made for these robots that we don't fully understand. We were hoping that you could shed some light on those." Dude, arrest him! And search the bloody, rotten body smelling animatronics. God damn it, how hard is this? Okay, if it's a crime scene or a suspected crime scene, come on, if it's a crime scene, you don't need to have a warrant, for fuck's sakes, okay? They all deserve spring lockings for the sheer stupidity alone. I'm surprised that they didn't crawl into one and then get killed by it just because they're that damn stupid. In it for Vanessa. I feel like this one is kind of obvious, and you may get mad at me for saying this, but Vanessa deserves to be spring locked, man, okay? You're probably thinking, but she's possessed, you moron. She doesn't have control over her actions. But that's the thing. She does. Vanessa has no willpower to sacrifice herself for the greater good, okay? At this point, I think that it's safe to infer that Jeremy from FNAF VR didn't go crazy because he just saw a glitch trap. It's fairly reasonable to say that he got possessed. Tape Girl hadn't broken glitch trap into the tapes yet, and he was probably just able to possess whoever he wanted. So if Jeremy did get possessed, and the possession worked in a similar way that it does with Vanessa, which would make sense, Jeremy would at times be sentient and in control of his own body. So if he knew about glitch trap, maybe he didn't cut his face off because he was freaking out like he had just taken like the Epsom salt because you use it in the bath. Maybe he did it to try and kill the monster that was inside of him, okay? So if Vanessa had the gall, Afton wouldn't really have a vessel, okay? Especially since the VR game at this point was probably abandoned. But she won't. But she won't do it. So she deserves to be spring-locked. And ultimately, in at number 2, missing children. Much like the Cassidy situation, the entirety of the missing children involved in the missing children's incident may have been spring-lock victims. We're still unsure as to the method of extermination that William used on the screaming pests. Sorry, the kids who run around in my building hallways they're still getting to me. If they ever go missing though, these videos are not going to help me. Anyway, we don't know how William dispatched of these kids before shoving them into the suits. And honestly, there may not be a way that he killed killed them before shoving them in. The act of putting them in the suits may very well have been what killed them, which would make sense given that a Springlock incident would be more agonizing than a simple knife to the chest. And a Springlock collapse would be a more realistic way for the suits to start leaking blood and other fluids, since one knife wound wouldn't really do that, especially around their eyes. Even if the suits didn't snap closed, if William shoved them into the suits, that's close enough for me. Finally, and at number 1, crying child. Okay, now this one is going to be controversial, but there is no way that I could do this list without mentioning one of the greatest debates in my DMs ever. The amount of people who message me on Instagram, not asking about my game's Kickstarter, but rather the Bite of 83 and how it had to have been a spring locking bothers me to my core. I say this every time I'm bringing it up. I don't think that this was a Springlock failure. That being said, it's still possible, and that's what this list is about. The reason I don't think it was a Springlock failure is because the Fredbear suit was already in animatronic mode, meaning no Springlocks would have a chance of failing. Since, keep in mind, a Springlock failure refers to the Springlock mechanism failing to stay open, meaning it snaps back into animatronic mode. That's why it's bad if someone is inside, and there would be no Springlock mechanism in and around the mouth because it would always be in animatronic mode, since the jaw just moves up and down. But nevertheless, it's still a possibility, since logic and physics doesn't seem to apply to the FNAF world, which is made evident by those goddamn doors from FNAF 1. Even if they're electromagnet, they would still be open with power, so if they ran out of power, they would end up closing. Just saying. And at 10, Henry. While Henry does ultimately perish thanks to the FNAF 6 fire, he would have been a target for William beforehand, especially once he had learned who was actually committing the crimes at his restaurants. But why didn't William go after him? It would have been too obvious, really. I mean, there are 5 murders that occur inside the walls of the restaurant. They already suspect William for it, but then Henry goes missing and then William is left as the sole proprietor of the business? That's super suspicious and would definitely result in an arrest. Motive means an opportunity. Motive is absolutely there, especially if William was cheating with Henry's wife or something. Means would be fairly easy to find, and William has plenty of opportunities, let's be honest. So, killing Henry would only result in William going to jail, which probably saved Henry's life. And at 9, Vanny. Vanny is an interesting case here, because while she is in a way a victim of Glitch Trap, she doesn't really know it, or at least is unable to communicate it, only being able to search help on the company computer. Not only that, but William could very well have killed Vanny, but he didn't, opting instead to gain partial control over her. So while she isn't a victim in the traditional sense, I'm sure that there are people who are willing to argue in the comments. So I'm going to make this simple. My list, my rules. Plus, this is a really hard list. There aren't many people who don't end up dying in the FNAF universe, alright? So cut me some slack if a couple of these numbers are iffy to say the least. But Vanny has not yet suffered the ultimate fate of the forever naps, so I'm allowing myself to say that she was almost a victim. Does that mean she isn't going to die? No, I feel like she almost certainly will perish, but she hasn't yet, and that's good enough for me. And at 8, Sammy Emily. Another one that kinda fits if you squint at it and then cough a couple of times. Sammy Emily was in the first 2 FNAF novels Charlie's twin brother who was kidnapped and killed by William Afton. We as the reader and Charlie believe this to be the case for the Silver Eyes as well as the Twisted Ones. However, in the 4th Closet, the 3rd and final book in the novel trilogy, we learn that there is no Sammy Emily, that instead Charlie was the one who was kidnapped and killed by Afton, and that for all these years every version of Charlie had been a robot designed by Henry and implanted with fake memories. So technically, since Sammy Emily isn't real, they aren't a victim. And if we want to get even more meta with it, they were almost a victim because Scott could have decided to let the story stay that way and not make Charlie a robot. But he didn't. Sure, Sammy could have been a real character. That, or if Sammy was real, they would have been a victim, meaning that since it didn't happen, they were almost a victim. Like I said, this list was hard, but I promise the next ones make more sense. And at 6, Bite of 87. The Bite of 87 is such an infamous incident that I can already hear people groaning in the comments. However, what if the victim of the Bite of 87, whoever that actually was a victim of a Springlock failure? It could make sense, since the animatronics had no harmful tendencies before this, so a Springlock failure is a reasonable assumption as to why someone got a frontal lobe removed. And a Springlock failure, assumingly, would definitely provide enough power to do that, since the Springlocks themselves would snap with such ferocity, and would probably circumvent the whole needing more power to do that thing. And if it was Jeremy, it would explain why the animatronics were suspended, because now one of their employees was bit and they had to promote him and fork over some extra cash to make sure that he didn't sue. So overall, whoever the Bite of 87 victim is could definitely have been a Springlock victim. Halfway through into number 5, Shadow Animatronics. One of the oldest theories is that the shadow animatronics are the first Springlock victims. This comes to us after the FNAF 3 phone guide dialogue that mentioned multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures, which some interpreted as multiple Springlock suits failing at once, since the term Springlock in this situation is used to describe the suit as a whole and the individual Springlock mechanisms that hold back all the robotic parts in the suit. So the line of multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures could mean multiple of the Springlocks inside the suit failing at the same time, or more than one suit failing at the same time. This led some to theorize that previous employees were killed in the Springlock suits, which is where the shadow animatronics came from. This is supported by the fact that these shadows are of Freddy and Bonnie, the two animatronics that have Springlock versions. And while there are holes in this theory, there is potential that this is the case. So the shadow animatronics are possible Springlock victims. I'm gonna have to keep saying that because people in the comments are gonna get mad. It's like, oh, they weren't Springlock. They could have been. It's possible, and that's the list, okay? Getting close to the end, and at number 3, us. We as the player in many of these games narrowly avoid death. Sometimes with ease, sometimes by the skin of our teeth, like in the Baby Night Terror level of FNAF VR, where we are literally trapped in a closet that baby could open at any time and kill us. Other times are less close, like if we see an animatronic right outside our window in FNAF 1 and need to quickly close the door before it gets us. But either way, there is no denying that we in every FNAF game are almost victims. Sometimes we even are victims, like in FNAF 4 where we die thanks to William pulling the plug, or in Sister Location where he gets scooped and stuffed with Ennard, or FNAF 6 where we willingly allow ourselves to be freed by the cleansing fire. No matter what, it's undeniable that we are some of the most resilient characters in the whole series. Normal people would see what they're up against and then quit day one. And then when asked about it at their next interview, they would say haunted animatronics were trying to kill me, so I quit. Simple as that, no other explanation needed. But we, as the players, stick it out for a week. And instead of quitting, we get fired, because we know what we need to do, and that's pretty admirable. Penultimately, in at number 2, Jeremy Fitzgerald. Jeremy Fitzgerald is the character most assumed suffered the bite of 87, a moment that has been debated since the start of the Five Nights series. While yes, this Jeremy may lose his frontal lobe, he could have lost his life. And I don't know about you, but losing my frontal lobe and getting promoted to day shift and suing that company to get a boatload of money sounds a lot better than death to me. Especially since MatPat concluded that one of the only things that would happen would be your loss of self-preservation and fear. Now I have no idea what an entire frontal lobe being removed would do, but it still sounds better than death, which in my opinion makes this character almost a victim, since if that animatronic had moved even slightly, or Jeremy had been an inch closer, it would have been much worse than it was. Oh yeah. Finally, in at number 1, Casey. Casey's the main character in a Fazbear Fright story I don't know if I've really talked about in detail. I might have mentioned the story here and there, but I don't think there's been a whole number on it. Casey appears in the Fazbear Fright story Dance With Me from Step Closer, the 4th Fazbear Frights book. She ends up stealing some glasses that when worn either reveal or display a Ballora animatronic dancing. Honestly, this is the first character I put on this list and the reason I thought this list was possible, since this entire story revolves around how she was almost a victim of Ballora. Now don't get me wrong, the story is very unclear in this regard, but it's generally assumed that the ending does imply that the little girl who gets the glasses back got snatched by Ballora, who spent the entire story slowly getting closer to Cassie every time she put on those glasses. She returns the glasses to the woman who owns them, and when her daughter ends up putting them on, she's the one who starts dancing. And knowing this series, I highly doubt it's because she was excited to see a 7-foot-tall Ballora dancing right in front of her. Cassie was very nearly caught by Ballora, instead having a little girl take her place. That kid was probably a brat anyway though. I hope it was Braith.